Okay, so hi, hello, welcome back. My name is Devraj, you know, and if you follow this channel for a while, you remember that I often like to hang out a bit online with Garrett here, Garrett Daun from Control Z, I think, or Command Z, and he's worked a lot for Reiki and stuff, and also with another chap, Chris Hyatt, I believe, and that kind of thing, and he's an interesting guy. So welcome back, Garrett. Welcome back. I see you've got a new and pretty bushy beard, you know.
Yeah, I just woke up one day and it was there. I decided not to cut it, but thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be back here, and doesn't feel like that much time has gone by, but I guess it has been a while now. Um, yeah, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I mean, I think I don't know if the last time I spoke to you, I was traveling. I started traveling a couple of years ago. You know, I know you also originally American, and now you're in Croatia and traveling, and then I'm trying to kind of settle a little bit more. I'm looking at trying to get a flat in Istanbul. I'm actually flying back there from Georgia tomorrow, Georgia,
Oh,
the
wow.
country, and just going through emotions of trying to get a flat, which is quite a drama. But yeah, I want to do that. Then I've got like a little place that I can call. Okay, this is my home. This is my
Yeah,
place, you know,
yeah,
and
man.
put empty one of the odd little tiny storage unit I've got around, get my shit together, and then travel and maybe rent it out on Airbnb if I can get that together. Anyway, that's my kind of plan at the minute. I think I was missing having a base and a home, so
Yeah.
I'm doing pretty good. I've been getting super into meditation recently, which is kind of a bit new for me to do more than a little bit. And
Mhm.
yeah, yeah, generally good. And how about yourself? What's been happening since we last chatted, like 18 months ago or something?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned about the meditation. I don't do anything that I would call meditation, but I do something I call either silent prayer or silent presence. Although I suppose it might get to the heart of meditation. This might be an interesting discussion for people. I find that the terminology, like if you and I were speaking in private, I would use probably an expanded vocabulary. I would be less careful about which words I would choose. But then when we are doing something live or when I'm speaking with new clients and things, I really restrict myself to purely like strictly Western and then physical terms. Like I would never use any kind of Eastern or other religious terminology that isn't firmly grounded in the West. Simply because I find that I won't know generally what the person is referring to when they start using foreign words. Uh, and then I find it easier to get to the core of what's going on and get the person to down to work, which is usually the goal anyway, to do the exercises, but without the terms. But then at its core, something like meditation, then I see I've gotten into studying some of the Orthodox practices, Orthodox Church, and then the lives of the saints. And at
Mm-hmm.
different times, they would use the term meditation, but it was not, when they're using it, it wasn't couched in something Eastern necessarily. Well, let's say Eastern in terms of Eastern Orthodoxy, but they weren't referencing Indian religions,
Mm-hmm.
for example. But they would use words like meditation, contemplation, and this kind of thing, with some amount of precision. So
Mm-hmm.
interesting you brought it up as kind of a digression. Um, but one thing I also noticed lately, and I did some posts about it on Facebook, was I kind of thought that some of the new age stuff had waned in the last few years. I was starting to think like, okay, this kind of waned and people are getting more into actuality. And then that's great for a practitioner like myself or yourself, in my opinion, because then they can get down to work and start getting results rather than being like completely living in the imagination, and interpretations and all this kind of stuff. But then I noticed on the Facebook feed, it seems to have just picked up steam again. And that could be just my feed, but I noticed there's that sort of what Hyatt called cosmic foo-foo seems to be kind of lurking around again.
Okay.
Uh, the endless seeking, the one more book, and then I'll be okay. This kind of
Yeah, yeah. I guess that scene will always be there, and yeah, as I see it, I mean, some people like the metaphor we used to have in the Osho thing was like, sometimes people they kind of walk around the swimming pool, reading a book about how water feels, and you do that
yeah,
for
yeah.
a while. And at some points, okay, either jump in or get in real slow, put a foot in, whatever. You got to kind of get in a little bit, but.
Yeah.
But what interests me about meditation, the context of body-based therapy, I think, is
Yeah.
like it's definitely a bit of a touchy or edgy subject in certain ways because there's whole kind of schools of people who, from that scene, who are quite down on meditation, and especially with this more work around embodiment, embodied cognition, and this kind of thing, and that there's been a kind of seeing that meditation is like kind of spiritual bypassing in some ways. You just sit there, your problems kind of go away, but they're still there in the background, but you think you're okay or something like that. And I think that perspective is entirely valid, and I consider that I have been like that at times, and that also I've met other people who I had judgments they were like that. But at the same time, it can be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. That, I mean, for me, there is something very deep about meditation that you can't really reach with therapy, and that's not just because I'm from Osho Sannyas, and that's what he would say, but it's just my personal experience as well. There is something very deep potentially about meditation, and it can be misused, and we can be bullshitting ourselves. But I absolutely find that there is something about it that is really core to us somehow, like something like that. You get what I'm saying? You have any?
I do. I do. It's funny because even sometimes I think the term spiritual bypassing is like self-refuting because the term itself kind of defeats its own purpose. That well, maybe it's a misunderstanding of what spirituality is, which then um, but I have found that there are times with I'll explain what I do with silent presence. It's simply sitting still, closing the eyes, and then becoming aware, letting the awareness with no effort spread from the top of the head, through the face, through down to, all the way through the whole body. Then noticing the breath, then listening to the sounds and acknowledging the sounds are happening in the here and now. So when you're listening to the sounds, you're here and now. And then from there, focusing on the forehead and observing the thoughts as they go by, but not having a conversation with them, not doing anything with them. And then over time, I become more and more aware that I'm not the thoughts, that I'm not the creator of the thoughts, that they almost have nothing to do with me. They're a form of temptation or of insult or of delusion of some form or another. There's no such thing as good or bad ones. They're just this stream. And then I become aware during the day. If I do that every morning, then I become aware during the day when I'm lost in there or when I'm here in actuality. And then it's so easy because just noticing means you're out of it. All that is noticing, and then the thoughts will try to abuse you. Oh, you were lost again, but then you just come back out again and again and again. And a lot of the trying to figure things out and problem solving that people do can become the source of their problems. This hyper reactivity to the contents of the mind then creates real life problems, which still a lot of times can be solved by just sitting still and sometimes doing nothing. Now, if you have to do something, to pay a bill, or if it will present itself to you again and again and again, and then you deal with it. But I have found a lot of life's issues are at their base imaginary, and then people create real situations in reaction to the imaginary. Like a typical example might be someone, their boss has a bad day at work and is upset with them, and it happens for a week or something. Maybe the boss's dog died, but he doesn't tell anybody. And then somebody starts thinking, oh man, I'm going to get fired. And they start acting weird and weird and weird and weird. And then they do get fired eventually because they've been prepping for that and acting strange. When actually, in actuality, nothing was really going on. Had they just, maybe that has nothing to do with me. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
I
let
mean,
it go of their life,
Yeah, yeah. And I guess it's like, it's a fine line, like with the spiritual bypassing, because I can totally relate to what you're describing. It's very similar to the way that Osho used to describe like meditative therapy, which was a whole phase that kind of the sannyasins went through. I wasn't there at the time, but it was back in the 80s. But like, where basically he would say, same thing, you can do therapy till you're blue in the face, but at some point you have to choose to not go down the same road in your mind that we choose with awareness that you have been going down into, but creating drama with thinking. And it's very similar. And he'd have these meditative practices, particularly gibberish and stuff like that, that he would use to kind of unwind the mind. And then you kind of sit and you have to just observe the thinking, or this kind of thing, or in your mind kind of label the thinking, but not go into the little kind of clusters that come up. But I guess what I see is like, it depends how much, in a sense, does that make your neck stiff? In a sense, which sounds like an offhand thing to say, but I noticed in myself, if I'm really, there's a certain level of energy in a kind of cluster of thinking, and that energy comes from something unconscious and repressed within me. And if it's above a certain level, actually, I need to go into it. I need to go into it, not necessarily during the meditation, but if it's habitually coming up for me, like for me, a long time, issues with authority, issues with hierarchy, they were so overwhelming for me. There was no fucking way I was going to meditate my way around that stuff.
Yeah.
Issues of loneliness and connection, also, and so in the times when I felt I was kind of meditating my way out of that, it would create a kind of stiffness in me, and like, and especially my neck, and then that's it. It is really hard to know, exactly, okay, can I just let this go now? Or do I need to go into it? And we just have to, I guess, start by going into a lot of stuff, and then at some point resolve it, clear, let the energy out in some way. And then it's like, okay, I can let this shit go now. I don't need to go back into that. Something like,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And for me, when I discovered, or kind of, it was simultaneously discovering and creating, but I knew a lot of people that were into meditation, and I would meet different people that would talk about it, and then I could tell they were judging themselves, or they were somehow sad by it or upset. And then this relates to the endless seeking too, which becomes demoralizing and leads to nihilism over time.
Okay.
And I said, well, what is it you're trying to do when you're sitting there? And it was either some form of guided meditation, which I consider to be actually just a form of hypnosis, as opposed to the deep focus, because you can get lost in the mind then very easily. Or they had this idea that they were supposed to stop the thoughts. So they were initiating this battle that's impossible to win. And some of the less ethical gurus were selling that idea, that as if they had stopped their thoughts. And then they get people on a subscription plan to, okay, one day I'll be like the guru, and without realizing that's not true.
Yeah.
And so then when I told them, hey, look, I created what I called the fake meditation, just to try and alleviate this issue, and deliberately named it thus because so that people couldn't let themselves believe they were doing something wrong. I said, the only way you can do this wrong is just not sitting there at all, not doing it at all, but just sit there, and whatever occurs is the meditation that day. Whatever the fuck happens, whatever, you start crying, if you throw up, if you tremble, if nothing happens, if your head's filled with garbage, that was the meditation for that day. And no time limit, 1 minute, 10 minutes, 1 hour, and some of those people wept just hearing the instructions. And I was like, man, I didn't realize how, deep of a struggle they had created with this idea of what meditation was, as opposed to this, this very direct. So that's why sometimes I don't even use the word, although I understand what it is. But I like to give an instruction that just cannot be mistaken, using purely physical terms, like really basic terms, which still I find that my instructions can be always can improve with accuracy and precision. But it's like, man, putting words into physical action is the real trick. But I digressed a bit. What I was going to say is that I see now that it was really the missing piece, or one missing piece of this Reichian work, and maybe different practitioners have added it. I don't know. But at least in the work I was offering to people, this silent presence was kind of a missing key. But that, in relation to what you said about the neck, you'll get data since you're doing the body work. Now you have this bodily awareness, which a lot of people don't have. So the difference between being lost in the imagination and being present. That's a huge, huge step. But then when you're sitting there doing your meditation or silent presence, and you notice that the neck is stiff, because now you can notice things, then you have some data you can bring back to the body work, for example. So
Mm.
right away, when I had that neck thing, and I did have that too, I would do really slow neck turns, like insanely slow, and I would get angry because it was going so slow.
Mhm.
At a certain point, the anger dissipated, and then the stiffness in the neck went away as well. But it
Oh,
was like a real pain in the neck at first, I mean, extremely slow, like maybe 10 minutes from here to there and back,
oh, interesting.
this kind of thing. And the tension just can't remain because you're moving so slowly and deliberately. So you can feel it
Right.
popping, trying to grip. But
Right.
then I go back to the silent presence, which would be every morning and every night, and you're gathering actual data in the body, which then correlates back to, okay, let's focus on some face stretches, or let's do the shoulders, or let's do whatever. I found it's like it was an important feedback loop. Whereas without it, people could do the body work, feel better, but never, unearth certain real deep emotional and imagination based, tensions, chronic tension patterns, and all this. So it is I added it to all my programs.
Yeah. I mean, I think generally it's like really, really healthy to, have practices which, they do different stuff
Yeah.
because like I remember, I mean, I was never really a big student of yoga, but in traditional Eastern spiritual systems, there was, this guy, oh God, my memory needs to improve, but 7 steps to something or other. What was the guy's name? God, famous yoga guy from like back in the day. They can't quite place when he did it, but he had this kind of 7 steps to spiritual fulfillment book, which is kind of vaguely in the Vedantic tradition. And it's annoying when I can't remember something because half of my brain is trying to remember it and the other half's trying to keep going. But like,
Yeah.
anyway, what I'm trying to say was this graduated path. You go up one step, like climbing it's like God or spirit or whatever is at the top of the stairs, and you go up one path, and you got the next step, and you got the next step, and then eventually you get there. That's the kind of concept. And some people that super appeals to. But what I found works much better was to jump from one camp, where you're totally in a kind of belief and a practice and stuff like that. And then at some point, jump into something which is almost the fucking opposite, you know? So
Yeah.
meditation and bioenergetics, or the kind of screaming and shouting group therapy that I was doing for a long time, was like that. In fact, I would do that. I would go to satsang, suddenly be back on my group therapy, really intense. Everyone's on you, encounter therapy stuff. And then other times like energy work, like shaking with this Balinese guy. And between the three of those, my mind could not really grip on and make a coherent way a path out, because I was constantly being thrown from like, okay, one set of practices that you do and you're always sharing about your inner world, in the
Yeah.
therapy, to meditation and satsang, where you're just totally trying to kind of focus on the master teaching or whatever and trying to get enlightened, and then the shaking, where it's just going on for hours and driving you fucking crazy, and this Balinese guy is zapping you with this energy. And what was so good about that in a way was not just the practices, which did work for me, but the fact that they were all different. So I was in this triangle where my mind couldn't create a pathway. It just slowly over time, the stuff I was holding on to, and I can really hold on, could come out. It could just come out because I couldn't keep the control going. It's like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm expressing what I'm saying. So in like manner, having something like bio and then or the Reichian work, and then also having meditation is similar, because they're based around different principles, and your mind can't grip onto it too much. I think there's a validity in that. And then some people just go from one therapy to the next and never really dig in with anything. And then they're just kind of walking around the mountain instead of finding a path to go up. And then that's the kind of opposite extreme where you never really get anywhere beyond first base. But yeah, I mean, I'm just talking anyway. But I see there's a lot of validity in this, and I also feel like somewhere these days, that we need people to be a bit more enlightened and really go through a journey and come out into the world and really, create change, radiate change, bring people up. It's like,
No.
you know what I mean? It's like, because I was doing these deep therapeutic processes like back late 90s, early 2000s, and most of that shit has disappeared. And even for young people who really want to do something fucking challenging, I don't see much of it around that's being well held, you know?
There's a lot of superficial stuff out there, man, and I
Yeah.
see it like the kind of let's like the California Bali scene. It's kind of
Mm.
like lowest common denominator material, mostly just veiled infantile kind of sexuality. Like
Yeah.
tantra courses and all this kind of which again, fine if people want to go do the Sodom and Gomorrah thing, and go to festivals and do all that stuff, that's fine. But when it's coupled with kind of playing at being enlightened, I see a lot of people who go through those scenes, and then when they're back at their so-called normal life, they're very depressed about it, or
Mhm.
they can't keep it together, and it doesn't last. It's like what Robert Scheinfeld called like the what was it, like the sunburn effect or something. You get sunburned at the you get with the blazing light at the festivals or at the workshops, but then you come back and
Mhm.
it doesn't really ground into anything.
Yeah.
Which again, I was suggesting leads to nihilism. Um, there's a lot of aspects of people's worldview that is unquestioned, and I noticed that about my own in the past few years, which kind of pushed me toward Eastern Orthodoxy, like the Eastern
Mhm.
Orthodox
Mhm.
Christianity. Which, of course, it could be easy to criticize different aspects of it, but there is something beautiful
Yeah.
about the consistency and the tradition of it. And now you've been visiting some of these places in Tbilisi or in Georgia. There's many. Further east you go from where I'm at, it's kind of the boundary of the
Yeah.
Byzantine Empire uh, when it was around. So there's like, I went to a church in Sofia that was built in the year 365, and they were doing the liturgy. I went for a couple hours of it on a Sunday, and the incense and everything is like the same as it was. Not that I can go verify, right? But ideally, that's what the seven ecumenical councils were for, and that you have this practice and this faith that was set up that's extremely resilient. If you look at the empires that it withstood, in Russia and Georgia and all across Turkey, all these places, Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, surviving communism and all this. But I found that the reason I went into it is kind of fascinating. A bunch of my old clients that had worked with me for many years, I got in touch, and they had all gone into started exploring Orthodoxy, in U.S. and Mexico and different places. And I was like, well, this is kind of a strange thing. And it was so many of them that I couldn't just ignore it, like it wasn't just a fluke. And I think maybe it's part of it is some people are yearning for something consistent and something traditional, and um, and maybe even something like enlightened patriarchs. You know what I mean? Somewhat enlightened. Meaning, if you read about some of these saints and martyrs, and there's so many of them, it's not like someone just sat and made all this up. And the existence of Christianity now, based on where it started, is proof of how fast it spread through the Roman Empire. I mean, in some of these stories, my God, like someone being tortured, and they have so much grace that the torturers convert on the spot, knowing they're going to be the next to be martyred. Like spreading like that. That's makes my hair stand on end to
Mm.
try and grasp that level of presence and faith. They
Mm.
had to have seen something beyond their own mortality. They had to have, or there would be no way. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
They were tuned into something so deep, and then to see that there's organizations that have attempted to keep and pass on that tradition and keep alive the lives of the saints and all these things just fascinated me. And I had an intellectual understanding of the differences, between Catholicism, Protestantism, and then Orthodoxy, but not until actually getting involved did I see like, wow, this is actually different on this body level too. Even
Mm.
the structure of the churches are made to resonate with the voices of the priests doing the chanting, and all this. Um,
Yeah, totally, man. I mean, wasn't even really aware of the existence of Eastern Orthodox Church until I got to Kiev 2 years ago, and it was there a bit. I'd go around some of the monasteries, and like I'm energetically sensitive. You can kind of spot, when someone's got some deeper state or they've got something about them, and I would see these old priests in black, around the laveras, as they call them in Ukrainian, and I think some of these dudes are really carrying some silence around. And then being like 8 months in Georgia, where they got Orthodox Christianity here like 3rd century AD, like
Yeah.
fucking 200 and something, even before bloody Constantine and shit, and it's unbroken since then, as far as I know, whereas of course Catholicism was kind of broken or came out again like around Thomas Aquinas or some dude like 1000 AD, and then it was Protestantism, which is basically like religion without an actual fucking any religious practices anymore,
Yeah. Just make up your own. Yeah. Choose your own adventure.
Well, not maybe that's a bit extreme, but Catholicism still carries a bit of something. But Eastern Orthodoxy, I mean, wow, it's deep. And I went to a friend of mine got married to a Georgian woman, and I went to the wedding, and you had to stand the whole way through in this church. It was
Yeah.
moving away, a number of seats and any of that shit, And but people were still on their phones a little bit, but like, and the priest, I mean, he was carrying energy, and he's in his robe, and he gets them to walk around 3 times, the circumambulation stuff. It's like a hour and a quarter long ceremony, a wedding ceremony, and it was just, you can feel it's got ritual behind it. It's got power behind it. You can feel it. And I guess coming up from the Osho scene, coming up from, not being a Christian, not coming from a Christian family, my mum would go to church like once a year. That was it, It was like, the natural reaction I had is just, Christianity is some boring old shit. That's like, it's just like, as a teenager, as in my 20s or 30s, it's just totally meaningless. I don't care about this shit, God and stuff. And then at the same time, getting progressive, being down with women's rights, gay rights, stuff like that, which I still am. But then seeing that this whole Western progressivism, which has come out and is moving across or trying to move across bits of the world, it's taking down the old religious structures, but it's not putting anything up in their place. This is a fucking crisis, It's like, I listen to some of these, like here in Georgia, we have the NGOs, and people are getting wise to this shit now, because the NGOs come over and they're well-meaning, American or British or European people, and they're all paid by funded by some kind of dodgy agency somewhere, but no one really knows about in the EU or the States or Britain. And they're basically, they're preaching progressive stuff to the young people to stir them up. And there's kind of a geopolitical agenda, and they do good, but there's also a kind of agenda. And this is the vehicle that I see, they're using to kind of try and dismantle the Orthodox Church here, or, push back into it. And it's like, okay, it's progressive, and I don't like to see how women are treated in this country, if I'm honest, at all, And they have every right to grieve about stuff. I've worked as a therapist with women here, and there's plenty of stuff which could change. At the same time, if you just dismantle something, you have a kind of responsibility to me to put something in its place. And there's fuck all to put in its place. And the West is in full-blown bloody meaning crisis, if you ask me,
Oh, yeah, it's nihilism on every continent.
People are fucking lost post-COVID, I didn't mean to talk like this quite so much, but,
No, it's true, man.
True, man. And it's like, okay, so you want to do all this progressive stuff, but you've got nothing to give people. And we're seeing it, People are lost. And
the interesting thing, man, is that
they don't want to fight, they don't want to really do anything. And it's like, they're just on the screen all the time, and there's no one acting as a good role model, or very few people, It's like, I don't know. I'm rattling on. What do you think about it?
No, it's like it's a destructive force, which is the issue with the decoration of goodness, or kindness. But it's kind of like a mommy style of like a clingy sort of love, rather than a fatherly kind of logical, like, okay, I know this sucks, but you're gonna have to be prepared for the world. So okay, we're gonna, you know what I mean? We have to get down to business a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you dismantle these age-old family structures, for example, using Orthodoxy as an example, which isn't inherently oppressive to women, but it does acknowledge that there's a difference in roles in a family and in giving birth, which the West is now even pretending that those roles don't exist, But and the role of both parents being there in the family for the children, and having at least some social consequences for not doing that. But if you start to dismantle that, what I think has happened in the West is if you break apart the family, which is the root of the community, and then you start to break apart the community so that people are no longer reliant on each other in the family, which again, in certain instances, it could be oppressive, it could be bad. But what we're trading it for is a reliance only on the state, this nameless, faceless machine or Leviathan that just absorbs and crushes everything in its wake without any concern for the individual or the group. Whereas if you grew up, say, in Orthodoxy and you have your family, there's some, you stay in touch with them and you're reliant on the other men in the community and your family's reliant on you, that's a pretty solid structure, even if the state falls apart and has stood the test of time, Whereas you see what happens when the reliance on the state becomes almost absolute, then you have a situation like Ceausescu in Romania, Stalin in Russia, or Mao, So
he came from Georgia, Stalin.
no. So you know what I mean? Though it becomes like, well, he knew that the Orthodox Church was a danger to his power. I mean, he had to like usurp it in a way. But yeah, it's so I think when you attack these structures thinking that you know better, but then people don't, like you said, there's what goes in its place, just this like pop music from the West, and you know what I mean, like drugs, and then women being convinced that they shouldn't have kids, and then suicide rate and depression rate goes up once they hit around 40 after living a life like that. You have companies in the US paying women to freeze their eggs to not have kids so they do their career. I just don't see that many. Maybe I'm way off. I haven't surveyed a bit large enough sample group, I'm sure, but I don't see a lot of people that are extremely happy and fulfilled, particularly women, if they didn't find a partner and have children and this kind of stuff. And I suffered from that in my own life. I thought I didn't want kids for my whole life, and I was full of ideas about why. And I think now I would, and I can't be certain, but I think that I would know more of what I'm capable of as a man if I had that kind of, if I had been raised with that kind of ethic to have children and to take care of a wife and children and this kind of stuff, So it's interesting to look at,
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's like, I don't know, for me, it's been recent that I kind of see this, and I'm open to other solutions. I'm from Sanyas, I'm from, super progressive kind of fucking background and shit, but like, I'm open to other solutions, but I'm very aware that you need a fucking solution. You can't just dismantle stuff. That is fucking vandalism. That's all it is. If you don't put something in its place, it's vandalism. And we're in this kind of socially experimental phase where we're doing this, or there's some level of background manipulation, whatever you want to believe, an underlying psychological drift, from all the kind of exploitative male stuff that's gone on in the last 50 years. People want to take care. It's like a wave coming back. But at the same time, you need something where people can develop, where they have a chance to actualize on some level. You can't just take all the stuff you don't like out of society. And I'm hopeful that young people are starting to see this somewhere. I know that a lot of people now, I was reading something, guys from 18 to 28 or something, who've spent hours daily on the internet, arguing with people on Twitter because they've got an opinion they don't like. So they feel like it's their responsibility to just point it out to them unrelentingly. They're like 13 hours a day on Twitter. And these guys are nearly in psychiatric ward now, and it's hitting burnout levels from the COVID times, and people just feeling an inner compulsion. And I can understand it myself, even being old, a lot older than that age range, an inner compulsion to confront and kind of push back against something that I see online, even to a point where I'm not even doing my own fucking work anymore. And I'm literally burning my adrenal circuits out. But that has been going on, and I think there's some suggestion also I've read that it's coming to kind of an end now, and people are starting to see that, like, okay, we've been in this culture war, we've got all this stuff, but what the fuck are we going to actually create to give ourselves a meaningful life? Because people are fighting against adulthood. Young people always fight against adulthood, but it's like the adults have gone. I
Yeah.
mean, to me, it's like, look at the situation with COVID. It's like this thing is finished, and whatever you think about it or whatever, there's like no closure. I'm not hearing anybody saying there's like closure. So, and closure comes from some adult in government responsibly standing up and declaring this is this, and we've decided this, and from now we're going to do this. There's none of that fucking shit, man. And it's like,
Yeah.
it's like all the adults have just gone. They've just left the fucking room. And
Yeah.
actually, we, the people, whatever state we're in, have to work society out, with quite a lot of oppressive algorithmic influences from big tech, or some positive things, and aspects of government as well. People who clearly have a bit of a totalitarian agenda, or just think that they could, like to have a constant state of emergency because it gives them the kind of right to declare that they need more power than they would otherwise have.
Yeah.
So it's just this
Yeah, I mean,
fucking.
I'd almost favor a Christian monarchy, at this point, like they had at some points in the Byzantine,
Where's the fucking king, man? Where's King Arthur?
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Like this, and that society is imbued with. I've seen little bits of this, in the culture in Serbia, and Bulgaria. And again, I'm coming from the West. I could be way off with this stuff, but I'll just say what I've seen.
Yeah.
But I notice in cultures that were primarily Orthodox, there's just different values that sometimes the people who've been raised in it don't even know that they're there, that they have.
Sure.
Like your chance of getting beaten on the street, in Serbia is very, very low compared to most big cities in the US,
Sure.
Same with Croatia, to its credit. But where there is that level of faith, well, what, something that just came to mind, I want to switch to this, was I see a mirror in the work that we do, because the beginning of this work is destroying things, chronic tensions and faulty brain wiring. It really is destructive. Otherwise, it wouldn't work so fast. Imaginary. So it's primarily destructive in the beginning.
Yes.
And but then a lot of the courses I've created, and then the live in-person stuff, I started adding things to them, like social experiments, cognitive experiments, trying on new perspectives at leisure, at your will, which has a lot of deep effects, but starting doing any music instruments. I try to push everyone I know to sing. I bring a little guitar around all the time, and people are so terrified of singing, man. It's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing how pervasive that virus is. But
yeah.
I can almost always get them to do it. They have to be fast. But anyway, so adding some kind of singing or just making sounds for 5 minutes a day, playing guitar, doing a drawing. Some people are terrified of that. I also incorporate sometimes this like tabletop role-playing games, with like a little bit of a twist, but making people get into those, create characters, get into the character, value that character's life, play it like it's meaningful, take risks, have fun, and I found within that context, when you have the body work and stuff, man, it just starts cracking open so many doors for people. So whereas I used to be more focused just on that destruction aspect, and then pass people along to somebody else, I realized that with the destruction, you free up so much life force that was trapped in staying tense and staying in suffering, that just giving people some avenues to explore from that is huge. It's huge. It can make the work happen faster and the destruction not so painful and not so drawn out,
That's an interesting correlation, Garrett. I hadn't thought of that in those terms at all. And of course, yeah, we are initially knocking down the the tarot keys, probably like that tower struck by lightning, which is kind of like this tower represents all the old beliefs that we had about how we functioned in society and how society functioned, how love relationships function, friendships, whatever. And it gets struck by lightning. The man and the woman are falling out of the tower. It's like, yeah, you're knocking down this tower that's been constructed of separation and a way of relating to the world. And I guess, I mean, from the work I do, I never focused so much on reconstruction, but just giving people space to reconstruct themselves, and rather than sort of saying, oh, now you need to be like this or something. That was never, because people kind of tried to do that to me at times. I think I kind of resisted it quite strongly.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I like to give people space to find out who you are now that you've dismantled this stuff. But it's certainly
Yeah.
true in my vision of the world over the last few months. It's like I see the West has taken a lot of stuff down. I support a lot of progressive things, but at the same time, it's not putting anything in their place. I
Yeah.
look at Georgia and I think, there's this kind of idea like, if we just had this kind of free market neoliberalism, it would be okay. Well, no, I don't think it would be, and it's like,
Yeah.
it's going to be a fucking mess, it's like, it's interesting, but this is where I've been recently. And also, like, I'm going to get started soon. I finished one series of books I was writing on bioenergetics and Reiki therapy. I did 4 titles, and I want to
Nice.
start some more, on body-based psychology and maybe practical alchemy, because I used to be in esoteric shit years ago before I did therapy, and so I don't know, but the underlying thing is like, people need the tools somewhere. They need tools to reconstruct themselves and to create something, because I don't think there's a higher power on earth that's going to sort it out. I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing anyone in the parent role. It would have to be like China or something, which is not, in my opinion, a particularly good parent. But I mean, at least they've got some kind of parental attitude, albeit in a rather totalitarian way. In the West, I don't see one person who's in this parent role. It's all just more propaganda. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, we have to work this shit out, and people like you and me who've got some level of knowledge in these kinds of, psychological technologies, as some people call them, we've got to bring them out to people and at least make them available and make
Yeah.
people aware of the potential of them. Because if that doesn't happen, I mean, fuck, we're looking at some kind of real. I'm not into, like some people here, like people I know, some Russians I know, they bang on about, the Antichrist is in the West. It's the Antichrist, basically. It's the devil, it's the 666. And, it's grind everything down into simple materialist values and keep total top-down control, Moloch and shit like this. And I'm not so much into that. That stirs up a lot of emotion for people who are in that belief system, and it gives them the power to push back. But I don't really agree with that so much personally. But at the same time, you need something. You fucking
Yeah.
need something, And, yeah.
Well, it all begs the question too, what is the purpose of this world, And as I mentioned earlier about the martyrs and saints that I've been reading about, as I understand it so far in Orthodox Christianity, the purpose of this world is not so much to, like, the world can't be destroyed if God created it. There's just an impossibility. It can shift, it can change, but that the purpose of the world in that worldview is a bridge to eternity. And then all the stuff you would do in your life becomes contextualized by that. So, for example, in James in the Bible, it said, if you fall into various trials, count it all as joy, because it's producing patience, which will produce perfect faith.
Mm-hmm.
So then you have a tool that you can use no matter what kind of suffering you're going through, and then you have these lives. You can study the lives of these martyrs, these saints, and man, seeing them, I'm like, oh man, I've never suffered at all for a second compared to this, not for 1 second.
Sure.
But putting that life into action, a life of prayer or a life of asceticism. And sometimes they went from being like a total prostitute all the way to a saint, in one lifetime, or a murderer to a saint, and this kind of stuff. But it really does beg the question. That's where my head's been at. And I'm not saying I have the solution, but as I get older, I start to think, like, really, what is the purpose of this world? What is the purpose of this existence? And I've had enough experiences, probably more than I can even remember now, that made me aware of something more constant or certain than mortality. Definitely had that flash of insight from many different angles, that there's of the eternality of the soul, the eternal nature of the soul. First the existence of the soul, then the eternal nature of the soul. And it doesn't mean to just take a big shit on this world, but I don't know that it also doesn't necessarily, it also means maybe it's not on our shoulders to completely save or change the world. Maybe there's something more in our control, which comes back to taking care directly of the people around us, of the people that are close to us and our families, and then in our communities, and actually trying to build something, whether it's just making some food once a week. You know what I mean? And I've seen that written in the lives of the saints and in some of these homilies of different monks. It's like, just take care of your brothers and sisters, take care of your family, go make sure everybody's doing all right. You kind of make your way through the world in that way, So that's kind of fascinating. It's become more, let's say, relevant and important in my own life. Mm-hmm. And I'm not grand success at it by any means, but I'm starting to see that was what was wearing me down about constantly traveling, was started to lose touch with something deeper with the people around me,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can relate to that as well.
So yeah,
So
here
what are you offering much stuff these days, or you having a break, or what are you doing with your therapies that you're familiar with and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, well, in terms of the work, I have a weekly group that's been going on since like 2015 or something. That's every Sunday evening. We meet for a full lay down body movement breathing session. Just got a guy from Turkey that joined recently, just and a few guys from LA. So it's nice. It's like that's one group I really have deep contact with, and it's profound that it can happen over the internet, but it really can. So that's like the cornerstone of the week, every Sunday night, 8 p.m. Croatia time, Central Europe time. So that can incorporate people on the other ends of the earth.
Yes.
Time-wise.
States, yeah.
And then I have a program that's I called the Undoing Intensives. And there's a few other ones from over the last 15 years that I'm now putting into like a training site. So I'm just slowly copying and pasting and making it more digestible, let's say. But the intensives is like a month-long thing that I put together, where there's 4 major themes, like 100% acceptance. It used to be self-acceptance, but it's just pure acceptance. Like, okay, if you can accept where you're at, you at least find your way back to the control panels a little bit. If you're lost in not accepting what's going on, then it's a big mess. Then come home to the body, meaning locate your identity in actuality as opposed to off in the past or future. And then end the fake suffering of the mind. That's another milestone. And then finally realize that there's nothing to live up to besides your own mission, or besides whatever your own faith, whatever it is. You don't have to be living up to the parents and the teachers and the society and the books and the time management system or whatever the hell it is you think you're supposed to be doing. There's something deeper in yourself you can start to live up to. So in that program, then every day there's a morning routine that teaches a lot of the work that you and I do, the face stretches, the shoulders, the flopping over, the different stuff, alternating, laughing, crying, whatever. And then and some other things I added in from other sources. And then every day there's an adventure for 28 days. It could be go forgive your mom and dad to their face if they're alive, which sounds, again, easy, but people have the most resistance to this. It's such a core thing. But also, or just make real contact for 24 hours. Whoever you come in contact with, establish real contact, even if it's just eyes for a second with the clerk at the store. Don't hide from it, So the daily adventures are things like that. So intensives is meant to break down most of the gross chronic tensions that we share, that most people share in the West. Get used to it, be able to put together your own morning routine, get into the silent presence thing. We talked about the meditation. So establishing all that over 30 days, which is a lot of effort it takes, but you don't ever have to do that much effort again. I built that program, and I guide people through it sometimes as a group, sometimes they do it alone. And then from there, they go into the weekly session. And then you have this contact, this kind of electrical contact with a group of people who also share some of the same values, some of the same aims, lay down together, do the breathing. And it's kind of profound every time I do that session with the group, and still blows my mind after 20 years how much depth the body work has. So that's the core of it. And then I'm working on some books. I still don't know which one I'll put out first, but I'm working on some private ones that are not related to the business.
Mm-hmm.
A couple projects related to poetry and things like that. Those will come out with a different, pseudonym, so no one will ever know. But then I've got one that's about specifically my take on the radical undoing bodywork. What the points about it that I think are profound, what people should know, something to show what it is, demonstrate the goodness of it, and then act as an invitation for more people to come in. So kind of like what you're saying, trying to put it out there in a more broad base, because I think people can really make use of it. And in my view, it does lead to faith. Getting rid of fear, which is the root of most of the other emotions and the tensions, getting rid of the fear tends to open the door to faith. Without me proselytizing. If I proselytize people, they're going to run away. They don't give a shit. You know what I mean? But I can say, hey, like, I find it profound to go visit Orthodox places whenever I can, and absolutely love it, and share some photos, whatever. I can do that. But I find that when people, and I can pick at people's fears and attack their worldviews, in good faith, or in a kind way. But I see that does lead to some sense of faith. And from there, I think life eases up, even in the depths of struggle and pain. And again, to circle back around, you end up, in my view, logic and reason do lead to an awareness of a creator. To put it simply, like, where do laws of logic come from? They weren't invented by the Greek philosophers. They had them in order to do their philosophy. So we're created in my view, in the image of God, which means we have a mind. There's metaphysics, meaning if we're using language, we're assuming metaphysics. We're assuming shared meaning of words, and then we're assuming epistemology because, well, I recognize you, I see you, I recognize you're Devaraj from somebody else. Yeah. So I'm carrying that knowledge with me somewhere, and I don't think it's purely physical. So then the existence of the mind points at the existence of a creator. And then in Christ, you have a personal creator who also was fully human, both fully human and fully God, which is a fascinating mystery to just even begin to open the door to, if we set aside all the reactions that we've been trained into in the last 50 years in the West, like, it's just some old-fashioned bullshit. But then to see the depth of the philosophy of these monks and of these church fathers and stuff, it's totally mind-blowing to me. And they were not fools, not
absolutely. I've been listening a little bit recently. There's a Canadian guy called John Verrecke who I listen to. He's like cognitive science and philosophy, but he also kind of interviews these really wise either old Catholic or Orthodox Christian teachers, and those guys have some really interesting stuff to say. It's been revelation.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I saw a phrase somewhere that was like, it's easy to get rid of irrational belief, but it's the next step is ridding yourself of irrational disbelief. What kind of stuff are you carrying around that you're disbelieving, but without having investigated? And for a lot of people in the West, they had a real bad experience with Christianity, mostly Protestantism, some Catholicism, and some probably Orthodox. But that one bad experience, it's actually accounted for in Christianity. We're in a fallen world. Everyone is a sinner. You're going to have a fucked up experience, But that doesn't mean that.
I have to. Can you say that? Because I was chatting to a friend earlier about, like, they were talking about the Dalai Lama and this latest scandal thing, and it was also like, and then she was like, and all these Catholic kids who've been abused by their priests and stuff, which does look a bit epidemic. So I don't know. I push back slightly. Yeah. You say it's all part of a kind of journey. I don't know. Yeah.
I'm not suggesting it's part of the journey. I'm not saying that. Okay. I'm saying it makes sense that that we have bad experiences with each other or with ourselves or with if we are in a world where everyone is a sinner, which is the one core aspect of Christianity, of the nature of Christ. Saying, oh man, this place is fucked up. What's going on here? And then seeing that there is a way through it. But yeah, I've dealt with a lot of people where they've rejected Christianity outright as something absurd or ridiculous just because they had bad experience when they were a kid with it.
Yeah.
You just like rejecting riding horses. I mean, this is of a different order, but rejecting mountains because
Yeah,
you
yeah,
puked in the car on the way through the mountains. You know what I mean?
yeah,
It's I'm not claiming it to be the universal truth. I think it could be, but more that like my work is to just break apart the belief and irrational belief and disbelief, along with the chronic tensions, along with the mental suffering. And then I have faith that people will find what they need to find, you know,
yeah,
that it will become
yeah,
obvious as you
yeah.
dispense with untruth and tension, what remains is truth. You know what I mean?
Mm, mm.
And I do have to go, but this is awesome, man.
Yeah, yeah,
I
man. Well,
love talking with you.
we can do it again sometime soon, you know.
Yeah, and I want to do some streams on my YouTube as well. So I'll message you, but we can keep
Sure,
going, man. If you're interested,
sure.
we can meet way
Yeah,
more
sure.
often.
Let's do another one or two. I'm moving around a little bit, but I've got time. I've got time, no problem.
Okay.
An hour is a
Yeah,
good time, something like that. And so, I mean, just to wrap up, you know,
yeah.
thank you for joining today, Garrett. We'll do some more soon. And for those of you who are interested in Garrett's work, then I'll leave a link to his stuff, which you will forward me in the description below.
Yeah, I'll do that. And it's just you can find me, Garrett Daun, Daun, on Facebook and get in touch that way. Garrett at radicalondoing.com for email, or just go to the website, click around, you know, get on the email list. And that's how we do it. We get in the intensives, try out the sessions. And if someone's really earnest, you know, if someone gets in touch with me and I can tell they're earnest, I'll generally give them a free session because this work is so far off from what most people have ever experienced. I don't really expect them to believe my words about it, you know.
Mhm.
And so, but that's when someone is earnest, when someone really needs it and they're earnest and they're not just fucking around. And I feel like I want to work with them, then I'll just schedule and give them a session. You know,
Mhm.
I like to do that. You know, and it tends to they know for sure. Okay, I want to go forward with this or not. You know,
Mhm.
so just so people know that maybe well, you know, the more when I put the books out, the more people come in my way, that'll become less and less
Yeah,
possible.
yeah, yeah. Books are
But
great.
you know, at the moment, yeah. So just so people know, get in touch and it's you can be rewarded for doing so. You know.